Good day, and welcome to the Budding Entrepreneur Podcast. I'm your host, Randy Bridges. In each episode, I cover my experiences, both good and bad, of being a business builder, as well as my journey through the crazy world of entrepreneurship to reach my goal of earning $10 million a year. We're on episode 102, and today's topic is want versus need and buyer versus seller. Now, this is going to be kind of an amalgamation of some of the things that I've read, along with some of the things that I'm going through in the program. We're dealing specifically right now with sales and selling and getting everything organized, dealing with the sales script and getting the process taken care of. And I had an opportunity to really reflect on the 10x is easier than the 2x, because it really dovetails in nicely with my program that I'm going through, along with some of the things that I've read before. One of the books, besides 10x is easier than 2x, that is really making good inroads for me is an older book from Jim Camp. It's called No, the Only Negotiating System You Need for Work and Home. Now, Jim Camp is no longer with us, but his family is continuing the legacy of what's going on, and that is great. I'm really happy about that. But Jim really put things into a nutshell a long time ago about want versus need. And he has a couple of quotes that are pretty famous, and I'll talk about them in a little bit. We're also dealing with Dan Sullivan and his whole concept of the 10x is easier than 2x. These kind of go hand in hand, and you'll see that when I get into this. So right now I want to kind of take a few minutes and wrap you up on where I am. I just completed the sales process portion, and we're now starting going into the getting people to come to you. Now, there's a lot of pieces of this that occur. That was generally where I was headed, and I'm getting good at it. I'm dealing with this. This is all new learning in some respects, although the sales part of this has been going on for quite some time. I wanted to get a quote that I keep hearing over and over about sales, and it's the person who can walk away controls the negotiation. Now, that's a Jim Camp concept, but in looking at Dan Sullivan, he also says there's a fundamental and crucial distinction between what Dan calls a buyer or a seller. We're dealing with wants versus needs and buyer versus seller, and what we're looking at here is just a simple distinction. The 10X book says, being the buyer means you have clear standards for yourself and you know what you want. The opposite is being a seller, where you're desperate to be in a particular situation because you think you need it. And there's that word need, right? Then continuing on, as the seller, you'll twist yourself into uncomfortable shapes to be accepted. You're unclear and uncommitted to your intrinsically crafted standards. You continually lower or change your standards to get the sale. Now, what's great about the wealthy consultant is the concept here in the sales process is, you're not selling anything. Nothing. If the customer wants it, the customer can ask for it, and then they can become a client over time. But essentially, you're not going to twist yourself into any shape. If you can help them do your thing and get them through whatever is happening with their business, whether it's good or bad, you can make a difference. And that's really what the whole idea is about, especially for consulting. We're always dealing with questions and not necessarily statements. We're going to ask our client or our customer to come back to us with some information about what it is they're trying to achieve or what they're doing or what they think is really going on. And we'll deal with that in a little bit about it, with them. But nonetheless, It's always that simple concept. We're not selling anything. We simply want to be a resource that the buyer can access. And if we're always putting the buyer in our mindset and not being a seller, then we actually eliminate need and get strictly to wants. Dan is common enough, with that. But when you are the person who can walk away, you control the negotiation. So it is with the sales process. Sales is a negotiation process. It's really presenting an offer to overcome the objections of the person across from you. And the easy way to do that is get to wants and not needs. Jim Camp talked about that, controlling your neediness. And there's a lot of people that are out there that want to control the conversation. You know them, you see them all the time. They have to be right. They have to be the one laying down the law for everybody else. And that's a sign of neediness. A person who walks into the situation and says, all right, talk to me, tell me what's going on, give me your thoughts, and if you have some issues, we want you to go ahead and talk with us about what you think is the right thing and the best way to handle it. And so I remember watching Peter Jackson on the Lord of the Rings, the making of, all the hours and hours and hours of video that they did that talked about how he did things. And everybody would come to him with drawings or what have you. This kind of a thing is done this way. And he might make suggestions. He might just say, yeah, that's the one, but it needs this or it needs that. And then that person goes off and does their professional best. Everything is always getting down to the one or two that are the absolute best. And you see that over and over again through this process. He's not needy. He's wanting something and simply working from that point of view. Essentially, he's being a buyer. The seller has to convince somebody. The buyer doesn't have to convince anybody. I remember years ago, I went into Guitar Center. I was buying a new bass, and I walked in, and, of course, they're, oh, well, yeah, would you like to try that one? Oh, yeah, sure, okay. This went back and forth. I would pick up a bass. I'd play it real quick. I'm like, nah, I hate it. And then move on to the next one. All right, pick up the next bass, I was thinking. And this was when I was moving up to a 6-string bass, which is a whole different animal. If you're a musician, the more strings you have, the more you realize, especially as a bass player, that the more strings complicates things quite a bit. I was looking at all the ones that I thought had great reviews, picked them up and went, ugh, right? They just didn't feel right. All of a sudden, the guy came up and he said, well, is there anything else that you want to try? And I said, well, how about that modulus up on the wall? And he goes, ooh, modulus. Now, I knew that bass had been sitting there for over a year. Who had the pressure to perform at that point? It was the sales guy. So he gets up there, grabs this off the wall. I pick it up, I play it. It's just like playing, just putting your finger in butter. It's so easy to play. And I was like, okay, now it's just a matter of the logistics of the buy. He didn't know what to do because he never dealt with an instrument, it seemed very obvious. He'd never dealt with an instrument at that caliber and that level. It's custom. So even off the factory is custom. It just was an easy sale. He didn't have to go through all these different ways of trying to sell me. And it was just a matter of getting the money together and getting a logistical decision in play. That was a wants versus needs thing. And I simply didn't capitalize and worry about it because I didn't have one. I just had a want, a desire almost. But I wanted to play it and see how it worked. And it was so easy to play. I still have it to this day. And I think it was 2012 when I got it. So it's been a few years. So getting back to this concept of want versus need, buyer versus seller, One of the things that Jim Camp, one of the things he talked about is, controlling your neediness of the sale, of the negotiation. And one of the things that I've come to kind of realize through this and some of the writings that Dan Sullivan has done and some of the other books, wants are external. It's about the other side. And in fact, Jim Camp's whole concept is negotiation is simply finding out what the other team wants, knowing what you want, expanding the pie maybe a little bit, or shrinking the pie just a tiny bit to be able to allow them to get their wants. If you're focusing on needs, now you get into needyville, and that's not a good thing. So wants are external. It's about the other person. Needs are internal. It's about me. And that's not the best way to go about things. So I really have been reminded about all of this as being just a wonderful episode of learning how to sell and remind myself the idea is to control that inner voice while you're going through the process. It's not just consulting. This is just about any kind of a sales process because they are negotiations. There will be parts of them. But if you can give them what they want and you get what you want and everybody's happy when they walk away from the table, there's no issue with that. So a good reminder to myself and passing this on to you as well. It was kind of interesting how I came across this book from Jim Camp, and I wanted to share that briefly, is I was getting ready to go on a long trip. I really needed something to read, and I knew it. I'd been through all my books, and I went to the bookstore where I always went. It was a used bookstore in Fremont, California, and I was just kind of looking around at books, Harvard books and this and that, and I kind of put my hand up, and this book literally fell off the shelf into my hand. It is the craziest thing. I'm sure somebody on the other side was stocking something, and putting a book up there or whatever, and it knocked this one off. But this book had to come quite a ways off the shelf to end up in my hand. And my hand was in exactly the right place. And I looked through it and I'm like, this is a great opportunity. I still have that book. It was dated from June 22nd of 2012. And that was selling it used. And I keep it. Yeah, it's a great book. Great strategies on keeping your neediness down. I'm continuing to work on the 2X is easier than, or 10X is easier than the 2X. I'm waiting on Taylor Welch's new book to come out here pretty soon. I ordered a pre-release copy of it, and I'm hoping that gets here pretty soon. It's supposed to be either at the beginning or the middle of this month. That'll be one of the books that I bring into the equation, and it is on selling, which is kind of cool. I really am looking forward to it. So those are the two books that I'm going to be putting on my list for this month. Wrapping this up, this is episode 2 to the Budding Entrepreneur Podcast. Wishing you the best in your health, your wealth, your business, your family, everything about you. Take care. We'll be back next week with a new episode, and I'll keep you up to date on exactly where things are.